Began a week ago. 19 people died in anti-government demonstrations.
Malawi troops are patrolling major cities Friday after anti-government protesters clashed with police.
Protests are an effort by opposition leaders and rights activists to stage a coup.
The scandal forced the government to shut down its payment system last year to investigate allegations that large sums of money had been stolen by officials.
This country is for all of us, and all of us have got a duty right now to stop this downslide. We can't wait until 2014. We've got to speak, and the time is now for everybody to stand up and speak and say that this government is failing to live up to its obligation.
My parents were not rich, very poor. I came from a poor background. I was born here in Malawi, in Blantyre. I went to school in Blantyre, and that was during the British rule of this country. And then in 1964, Malawi became independent, and things changed drastically at that time.
Very few streets, very few shops, very few offices. Most houses were single story, most buildings were single story. And it was a very peaceful and quiet time. Malawi was one-party rule, so we never knew much about anything outside, but the community all knew each other and stood up for each other.
Older I got and working, and I met my late husband, who was a Sikh, Punjabi. He was third generation in Malawi. His grandfather came out with the British as a soldier when the British were coming in to fight the slave trade. And they stayed on and worked in establishing the railways. And it's a privilege for me to have gone through it, because it gives you a different outlook, a different perspective on life. And I also know that with the Sikh community, there's a very big emphasis on feeding the poor, clothing the poor, and helping everyone around you. So that is something I admired very much, and that stayed with me. See, when my husband passed on, even before he passed on, I was involved in different works outside the church with the church, reaching out to less privileged, to orphan children and situations like this. And when he passed on, I threw my whole energy and time into doing those things. I've preached in all 3 regions of the country. I've ministered. I've seen the suffering in the villages, the abject poverty. And yet this country is richly endowed with minerals and an extremely fertile soil. You come to the realization that something is wrong in government. And that's when I decided I'm going to go into politics and I want to run for president.
There were 11 candidates for president. She was the only one that would tell the truth, to say what was on the minds of the people. She was the only one that knew what was really on the ground, with what needed to be done. 90% of the remaining candidates were recycled politicians from 1994's government to the next government, to the next government, and the government after that. They've just been changing the color of their shirt each time the government changes.
There's a lot of wealth in this country, and there's a lot of bank accounts that each one has got outside the country. So they all know each other's secret. So they can only put in one of their own if they don't want to be caught out.
And we've had this huge phenomena called Cashgate, where president after president after president and his ministers, members of parliaments and friends, family, really looted billions and billions out of the government coffers.
The government has shut down its payment system to investigate the disappearance of more than $4 million in a scandal dubbed locally as Cashgate, which has stalled salaries for more than 150,000 public workers. Envoys from 8 Western donor nations are calling on President Banda to address the alleged corruption at the Treasury and investigate the recent shooting of the budget director, allegedly connected to graft investigations.
There are many laws which have to be changed so that the laws of this land are in favor of the people of the land.
So we travel through every district and there's a lot of poverty. There are people that even when they're so sick that the hospitals are so far and they don't even have money to get on the public transport, that they stay at home and they get sick and they die.
Why are they dying of HIV/AIDS when other nations, Uganda, reversed the HIV/AIDS pandemic? The West, you live with the disease for 40, 50, 60 years with the right medication. We don't have medication. Ruling elite will take HIV/AIDS donated money and use it for their projects. No one will make enough noise. The ruling elite has all power. If you make too much noise, you will be arrested, and previously we used to say you'll be fed to the crocodiles, which used to be the thing. But now you just disappear.
They said that she was an Indian, and when that failed, they then said she was from Mozambique, and when that failed, they tried any other angle to try and discredit her and show her to be from somewhere else on the planet.
I felt a kind of trepidation going in as a brown-skinned woman. First of all, brown skin. Second, a woman. Because even in church circles, when I headed some programs, national programs in church, I've had people come to me and say, this is all wrong. You're a woman and you're brown. It should be a man who's black.
We would get phone calls from all quarters telling us different stories. Some would tell us about how well my mom is doing. Some would tell us that your mom is doing too well, that government is going to put spanners in the works and bring it to a halt. And when election time came, my mom was out in the constituency, and there were so many irregularities, so many anomalies, that the whole thing just started to break down.
When the counting was happening, we were told that the elections had been rigged. We went to the main tally center in the district, and we found a group of electoral commission staff changing documentation. I said to the lady, oh, you're changing figures on this page. She says, yes, they don't tally. I said, you have 8 signatures of people that counted with you. Are you going to get these 8 signatures back here to sign for the changes you're making? Oh, you want to cause confusion here. Security and police arrived with three truckloads of armed police. One person was successful in Lilongwe to take the matter to court, and when judgment would be given the next day, and judgment invariably declares that you must recount, the warehouse was burnt down under high security.
Wrapping up our bulletin, Malawi police are investigating a fire in a government warehouse that destroyed ballot boxes containing votes from a disputed election just days after a court ordered a recount.
And the judgment came through the next day, and it was the ballots must be recounted, and failure for that, there must be a rerun. This has never happened.
She did have the support on the ground, but African politics is a totally different ballgame. It's very difficult to control and monitor and ensure that it's free and fair. It's very difficult.
And it just makes you wonder what it is that drives a group of people to want to cling to power at any cost. They must have an agenda which is so lucrative personally to each one of them that they're willing to go to all these lengths.
I'm ready to turn this country around. I want to assure our traditional friends in the West that we'll continue our traditional relationships. However, let me say this also, that we are now beginning to have new friends. We have new friends in China, for example, but also have new friends in the emerging economies.
There's been stories where other vocal, politically inclined people have mysteriously died. Anti-Corruption Bureau, there was investigation into the abuse of power and resources at Capitol Hill. He was murdered, and investigations have never taken place.
We have to keep reminding the public that it's their vote, that it's their chance to make a change, their chance to make a difference. It's up to them to stand up. People in Africa, not just Malawi, but the whole continent, need to remember that the government is a servant to the nation. It's not the ruler of the nation. The people rule the nation through its government. It's a democracy. And any country in the world, it's the people that are in charge.
I call these African governments today as criminals. This is a crime against humanity. And during the presidential debates, I said I would ask the International Criminal Court to have a court in Malawi. I think they'd spend the next 10 to 15 years dealing with these court cases. Things have to be made right.